Greetings and welcome to Yarnspirations.com. In this video we're going to take a closer look at the stitch patterns in the Texture Mix Knit Tunic. This is a luscious tunic made in Bernat Maker fashion yarn. It knits up very quickly on size 6mm and 6.5mm knitting needles, or 10s and 10.5 for our US friends. You'll need the yarn, you'll need this wonderful pattern. You will need the knitting needles in a couple of different lengths, so be sure to check that out against the pattern. Or of course the sizes needed to obtain gauged. You'll need a stitch marker and 2 stitch holders that you're going to use in the finishing. Now this is a beautiful piece. Its asymmetrical placement of these different texture stitches make it really interesting to knit and to wear. So we have this zigzag pattern on the bottom, then we have the leaf cluster stitch, which I'm going to show you in depth, and then up here is a very simple box pattern which alternates 4 stitch squares of knits and purls, actually 2 by 2, 2 stitches by 2 rows. And all of this, let's take a look, is charted out. So you can figure out what size you need. I like to outline mine and just follow along with the chart. You don't even have to follow the written directions if that doesn't float your boat. So we're going to do this zigzag stitch first and then take a closer look at the leaf cluster stitch. Let's get started. Now to make the front, the back, and the sleeves, you're really going to have to read the stitch diagram. And I know that some of you are resistant, and I just don't know why. It's a newer way of working, but it makes life so much easier when you can see where every stitch belongs in relationship to the row below. So let's take a look. This is the front and the back. And you can see that every single stitch for every single size is charted out. And as we often do with Yarnspirations patterns, we have color-coded the numbers so you can see. But it is my experience that finding these dark lines are really hard to do when you're knitting. So, for example, I'm making the extra small right now. What I like to do is take a colored pencil and go over the line so that when I'm knitting right along, I don't have to guess where my where I need to be looking. I like to be able to see without having to count. So the first thing I would do is take a look at these graphs and color in any color, but color in the line so you can see what you're doing while you're knitting and you're not trying to guess where your size begins and ends. Now I'm going to work on the sleeve because that is a smaller piece and I have a smaller amount of width on my camera. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to color that right quick. Now the sleeve does not have the leaf stitch in it. It's the zigzag stitch and then the little squares at the top. So this is a really easy diagram to read because there are not symbols that look very much like each other. So for this zigzag stitch that we're doing, if it's a clear empty block, it is knit on the right side, purl on the wrong side. And if it is a colored in gray block, it is purl on the right side, knit on the wrong side. Now, for one sleeve, I'm going to start with 1 as the right side row, and I'm going to work right to left, and then for the next row will be left to right, right to left, left to right. That's how I'm going to read the chart. Now for one sleeve, you're going to begin with reading right to left, row 1 from the right side. On the second sleeve, you are going to begin with row 1, reading it from left to right. And the reason you want to do that is so the sleeves mirror, so that when the stitch pattern changes, it looks the same on both shoulders. But let's just take a brief look at that stitch pattern. So I am knitting the extra small, so I'm going to start right here. And that's a clear empty box, so I know and this is a right side row, so I know that's knit. And the gray box is purl, because I'm on a right side row. For one sleeve, I'm reading right to left. Also, my ribbing is not as big as yours is going to be. I just put a couple rows on there so you could see what I'm doing. So I'm going to knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, purl 2, knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, purl 2. I'm going to do all the way across, and that's going to end with a knit 4. All right, that's the end of the first row. Now, the next row, I'm going to begin reading on this side of the chart and go that way. And that is a wrong side row. So the clear or empty boxes are purl on the wrong side, and the gray boxes are knit on the wrong side. So I'm going to purl 3, knit 2, then purl 4, knit 2, all the way across to the end. And I'm going to end that with a knit 1. So I'm going to read in this direction for the second row. So that's purl 3, knit 2, purl 4, knit 2, purl 4. Okay, coming up to the end, we're going to end that with a purl 4, knit 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, knit 1. So next is going to be row 3, which is going to be a right side row, so that's purl 2, knit 4, all the way across. It's going to end with a purl 2, knit 2, and so on. I'm just going to go back and forth, going from row to row and making sure I'm reading in the proper direction to get that zigzag pattern in. And that is the same stitch I'm going to also use on the front and the back. So here I am at the end of the 14th row, looking at the right side of the work. You can see that my zigzags are starting to build up, which is exactly what I want to happen, and I'm following along in the chart. Now, taking a look at the chart, you will see that the 15th row, no matter what size you're making, has an extra stitch on either side, has an increase. To me, the nicest way to do that is with a make 1 knitwise or make 1 purlwise, 1 stitch in from the end. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Again, on the extra small, because that's what I'm knitting here on camera. So my first 2 stitches are both knit because I'm on the right side of the work. So to do that, I'm going to knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to make 1 knitwise, by which I mean I'm going to pull up the loop and I'm going to put it on the left-hand needle tip, and I'm going to knit through the back of the loop, and then I'm going to knit my next stitch. So I have 1, 2, 3 stitches on my needle, and looking at the chart, I have 1, 2, 3 knits at the beginning of the 15th row. Now I'm going to go across, purl 2, knit 4, etc., all the way across. When I get to the end, let me bring that up a little closer to camera. When I get to the end of row 15, you can see I have a purl stitch and a knit stitch. So I'm going to continue working in pattern across until I have 1 stitch remaining on the left-hand tip. Then I'm going to do a make 1 purlwise, which is the same action we just did. I'm going to use the right-hand needle tip to bring up the horizontal bar below. I'm going to put it on my left-hand needle tip, but instead of knitting through the back loop for the make 1 knitwise, I'm going to purl through the back loop for the make 1 purlwise. That will give me a purl stitch. I'll have 1 stitch on my left-hand needle, and I'm going to knit that. So continue on, whether you're doing the front or the back or the sleeves, you're going to continue on following the chart. For the sleeves, all you need to do is those knits and purls, and again for the front and back, we're going to work on that leaf stitch that's here in the middle. So let's do a couple of rows of that leaf stitch on a separate swatch. Now let's take a look at the leaf cluster stitch, which you can see in the photo is gives these little petal shapes to your stitching. Now I know that so many of us are allergic to doing swatches, and of course you need to do a gauge swatch for this to make sure it fits, but I also highly encourage you for this one particular stitch to do a little practice swatch so you get the hang of the stitch. The reason is because you're pulling up these giant loops from 2 rows below, and it's really easy to mess up your gauge either by making the loop too large or too tight. So I highly recommend that you practice. Now, even though if you look at the chart for the sweater, for the front and the back, you will notice that there are not full rows of the leaf cluster stitches. They are sort of scattered throughout. We've also let you know what the stitch count in multiple would be if you just wanted to do a practice stitch. So once again, I highly recommend that you do that for this one stitch. So it says the leaf cluster stitch is worked in rows 27 to 84 of the chart. To make the practice swatch, we're going to cast on a multiple of 8 plus 4. So I cast on 28. So that's 3 times 8 is 24 plus 4. So that is my swatch. Now the other note you need to notice, which it says on the top of page 2, is that when you're working the leaf cluster stitch, the stitch count will vary on the 2nd and 6th rows. So because we are taking stitches away and adding them at different times, you know, a lot of times, particularly in lace, your decrease and your increases are paired. If there's a yarn over, there's a matching decrease and vice versa. But on this stitch, you're taking away stitches on some rows and adding them on others. So your stitch count is not going to be the same throughout. It doesn't mean you made a mistake. That's just how the stitch goes. So let's take a look at the leaf cluster stitch. So the first thing it says is knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it says, it has an asterisk and it says knit 2 together, SSK, knit 4, repeat from asterisk across. So knit 2 together, so that is your right leaning decrease. You are knitting 2 stitches together as one. Then SSK, which is your left leaning decrease, which is slip 1, both knitwise, and then knit them together through the back loop. Knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that a couple more times. Knit 2 together, SSK, knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, knit 2 together, SSK, slip, slip, knit, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's the end of the first row. The second row and all the alternate rows are purl across. Remember, that's just for this leaf cluster stitch. That's in, since it's in rows with other stitches, you really have to look at the stitch diagram at the chart to make sure that you are stitching in the right place. Okay, let's take a look at the instructions for row 3, the third. So the first thing I'm going to do is knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, this is where you have to pay a little bit of attention. It says draw up the long loop in space between knit 2 together and SSK on first row. So it's not here. It's way over here. Here is my here's my knit two together. Let's bring that up a little closer. So here is my right leaning decrease, and here is my left leaning decrease. And I'm not going in the row below, I'm going in the row below that. So between those two stitches. So I'm going to draw up that loop and put it on my right hand needle. And I'm going to make sure that it has enough elasticity to get up. I don't want it too tight and I don't want it too loose. I don't want it all scrunched up and I don't want it sloppy. So I want to make sure that it goes up the height of the work I'm already doing. Now I'm going to knit two, 1, 2. Now draw up a long loop in the exact same place that you already did. So you're going back here. So it's a little bit before where you are. Yarn over and bring that loop all the way up. So once again, I want it to have a height so that it will lay neatly with the work that I've already done. Knit 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do that a couple more times. So I'm going over here. So not directly below where I finished off, but over here between the knit two together and the SSK. And it's basically going under 2 bars. I'm going to draw that loop up, making sure that it has the same height as the rest of my work. Knit 2. 1, 2, and then the second one is easy to find because you're going in the exact same space. So it's a little bit before where you're working. Draw up that loop, make sure it has enough height to sit nicely with the stitches you were already doing. Knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. All right, for this third one, I've adjusted my lighting a little bit so that the yarn is a little lighter, so maybe you can see a little better. So I have knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going over here past one stitch between the knit two together and the SSK, and you can see them because one leans to the right and one leans to the left. Go under 1, 2, those 2 bars, yarn over, pull it up, make sure it has a nice height with the rest of your work, knit 2, and then go in the same space, which is a little bit before where you're working. Yarn over and pull it up. Make sure it has the same height as the rest of your stitches, and then you're going to end with that knit 4. So you've added stitches on this row to make up for the stitches that you took away in the first row. So we've completed the third row, and you can see the beginning of your leaf cluster. So now we're going to purl back, which is the 4th row. And it's important to purl the loops in the order in which they belong. So you'll see that big loop, then you'll see 2 together, then you'll see the next big loop, and then you'll see 4 together. So make sure you treat each one of those loops as an individual stitch. Moving on to the 5th row, it is knit 2 together, SSK, knit 4, and we're going to go do that all the way across. And we're going to end with the knit 2 together and the SSK. And you can see that the knit 4s are lining up on top of the clusters we have already made, and the decreases are lining up on top of the stocking stitch section. All right, here we are coming up to the end. So once again, these decrease rows are setting us up for where the leaf clusters are going to be. And remember, so we're going back on row 6, which is just purl across. Remember, rows 2 and 6, if you count the stitches, it's not going to be as many stitches as you began with, because the rows before 2 and 6, so 1 and 5, are the decrease rows. While we're here, let's take a look at the back. You can see the back of where those picked up stitches are. It's a little less loopy than it is on the front. Now coming up on the 7th row, we're going to do what we did on the 3rd row, which is draw up those long loops in the spaces between the decreases 2 bars below. So since I began with my decrease, I know it's here, right on the end, and I'm going to go 1, 2 down. I'm going to pull up that long stitch, make sure it's the same height as the rest of my work, knit 2, 1, 2, and then go back in that same space for the second long loop. Checking that that height is good. I know I've repeated myself, but you need that height to be good so that the work is flat. It's not pulling up and it's not too loosey-goosey. Same thing, go past that first stitch and 2 below. Once again, you are drawing up that loop between the right leaning and the left leaning decrease. Check my height, knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's drawing up a loop, knit 2, and it looks a little tight to me. I'm going to pull it up. Drawing up another loop, knit 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're left where those 2 decreases were. Draw up a loop, knit 2, draw up a loop. Now, a couple things I want to point out. So as I said before, what this does is this staggers the leaf clusters. So they're here, and now they're here, then they'll go back here, etc. Because the next row would be purl back, like we're doing on all the wrong side rows. Now, if I was working even in this stitch, you could see how my edging would be a little different, because I have a leaf cluster at the beginning and the end on alternate segments. However, according to my pattern, I'm putting leaf stitches in a variety of places. There's 2 here, there's 5 here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 here, and they blend in with the other 2 texture stitches, which is one of the things that makes this sweater so interesting. So you can go ahead and finish up your pieces following the charts, and then you will block them to the measurements for your size that are on the schematics. And then for finishing, after you sew the shoulder seams together, and then you're going to pick up and knit a collar. And remember, we have some stitch holders there to use in a couple of places to put that collar on. And then at the end of that, you will sew the side seams and the sleeve seams, set in your sleeves, and weave in all your ends. This actually goes very quickly though, because it's a decently thick yarn on a 6 and 6.5 millimeter knitting needle, 10 and 10.5 for our US friends. So it goes very, very quickly, and the multiple stitch patterns keep it interesting. So I hope you have a really great time making the texture mix knit tunic. Thank you so much for joining us here on Yarnspirations.com. We look forward to seeing you again real soon.